Hi everyone, this is an introduction to Program 1, so that's our first big programming assignment that has kind of a lot going on, so I definitely recommend getting started on this early. So it's not due until Monday, May 24th, and so throughout week 2 of the class, we are learning all the different parts that you're going to need for this assignment. And so if you haven't gotten to, say, day 3 or day 4, you might not know how to sort an array yet, or make a makefile, or read something from a command line argument. But you can still start this and just get part of it working. So, as usual, you're gonna push a tag to turn this in. And like I said, there's a lot going on in here, so we have a lot of learning outcomes. So what you're gonna get is a list of network addresses. And so why don't I just pull one up right now? So the type of file that your program will use is something like this. So here I have, on each line, I have a network address. And so my network address consists of 4 integers that are separated by a period. So here I have 1 integer, 2 integers, 3 integers, 4 integers. And so I'm going to want to read these in, and they will always be between 0 and 255, and we'll come back to that later. So we also think of these as being different, our networks as having different classes. So class A networks have as their first integer anything between 0 and 127. Class B go from 128 to 191, Class C 192 to 223, and D and E are even larger. And so in this assignment, we're only going to use Class A, B, and C, and we're going to ignore D's and E's. So the important thing that differentiates the classes is that based on which class it is, more of those numbers are used to identify the network. So for example, let me pull up here. So this on line 1, it's 168, so that would be a class B network. So for this one, so here I would say that the network is 168.12, and the host is 110.25. Let's just make sure that's what this says as well. Yeah, so for class B, the first 16 bits, meaning the first 2 numbers, represent the network part, while the remaining 16 bits, the last 2 numbers, represent the host part. So let's keep looking. Okay, 192 to 223 is a C. So this is a class A network, and so the network is 64, and the host is 113, 134, 35. And then this one is a class C network, and the network is 217, 158, 91. Yeah, let's double check that. 217 is between 192 and 223. And then, are there any really big ones here? I think this might be 245. Yeah, so your program should just ignore one of these. This is a class E network, actually. So that is an explanation of the different classes. And so we'll start to see why this matters. So you're going to read in a file of network addresses, and you should use scanf, and you should use file redirection rather than, if you already know how to read files in using C, you don't need to do that for this assignment, just use scanf to read them in. And we're also going to take in a command line argument. So as an example, let's see if I can quit out of this without making changes. I may have, okay. Let's just double check that that didn't make any changes. Yeah. So when I run my program, so I already have a compiled version of it, I'm going to run it by just like normal. I'll run my program, but now I'm going to pass in a command line argument. And so your command line argument is the number of lines in the file, and then you pass in the file. Oops, I did not use redirection. So these test inputs that we have for you, this one has 17 lines, so you should pass in 17, etc. And so when I run it, I get this output, and let's see some more information there. So what you should do for that file is you should print the number of Class A, Class B, and Class C networks. So let's just take a look. So Class A has 5 networks, Class B has 5 networks, Class C has 2 networks. And the thing is this is actually the unique networks. So we can see that this had 17 lines, but we're only getting 5, 10, 12 total networks, and that's correct. We want to count the unique networks, not just not the number of hosts. So let's look back in here. So for example, all of these should only be counted as one network. 106 is Class A. So all 3 of these should only be counted as one Class A network. But when I'm looking to, like this one, 13 and 14, lines 13 and 14, those are let's see, 168 is a Class B network. So these 2 are Class B networks, but because Class B networks their network is identified by not just the first number, but also the second number, these are actually different. So this is going to be really important to understand. So these 2 different Class B networks. Whereas these are the same because they're Class A. So your program's going to have to treat Class A, Class B, and Class C networks differently. Oops. Oh gosh. Okay. So that's how you count networks. Next, we're going to need to print out the network with the most hosts and the number of hosts it contains. So here in our example, we said largest A network is 106 and it had 3 hosts, and we saw that in example already. Now for B, the largest B network is 137.249, so again, highlighting the fact that B networks are identified by their first 2 numbers. And Class C also had one. Ooh, I have a mistake. So it looks like I have a mistake when I'm printing out my Class C networks. I'm missing a dot there, and let's see if I also have that in the sample output. Yes, I do, because this is coming from my implementation. So before you get this, I'll make sure that that is fixed. Actually, I'll just pause the video now and fix it to make sure nothing really bad's happening. So I just was missing a period in my largest C network, or in my network printing function for C networks. I think it's fixed now, and when we refresh this, hopefully, aha! So it's fixed on the actual program 1 page, and my program, I believe, is also fixed too. So I have my executable is program 1, and I'm just testing on, I need my argument, and then I use redirection to put in input 17. And yeah, so let's take a look at that file. Maybe we already did this, but we'll check again. So which one was it? 215. So 215, we can see, so it is 215, 116, 26. So that's a class C network. So for two networks to be the same, they need to match the first three when it's a class C network. So let's see if there's anything else in here. I guess one other thing to point out is that you have a special output when if the largest network for that class only has one host. So I don't remember which one it happens for, so I'll just try some. 2000. Aha, so class C in the file with 2000 network addresses, there's all 256 are unique. There's no network that has multiple hosts, and so in that case you need to print all C networks have only one host instead of saying like largest C network is the last one you processed or whatever like that. So this is kind of a big program. There's a lot going on, and so if you need some help getting started, here are some instructions about how you might start. So first, on Thursday this week, we learn about reading in command line arguments, but if you haven't watched that lecture yet, like let's say you just want to get started on this, you don't want to watch any more lectures, you could just hard code in some whatever value you want to test with. Oh, another thing, I don't know if hopefully this is on the actual page. Okay, so in public program 1, there are sample input files. So if I didn't already have these here, I might do copy public program 1, and we can see there are actually a bunch of input files. There's an input A, an input B, and an input C that just have A's, B's, and C's in them, if that's helpful to you, or they're just larger and larger files, and what is on the page is the output that you should get for the 17, 2000, 5000, and 8000. So you can test that your program is working correctly by using those sample inputs. But you could do something like copy all those input files, or you could just copy the ones you want. Like if you just want to start with the 17, you could just copy that here. And I already have it, so it'll just overwrite it, but that's fine. So if I wanted to get started on this, I'm just going to make a new file. I'll call this new program 1. Yours will be called program 1. And so I would have my preprocessor directives up here. I won't even put those in right now. But so in order to read my command line inputs, you can see in the video for lecture 8 how to do that. But for now, I could say something like, I'm going to deal with that later. So I might put like a to-do, read in number of network addresses from command line. We'll need to change the inputs to main. And so in the future, I before I turn this in, I will actually read those. But for now, just to get something working, maybe I say something like int num addresses num network. So the number of network addresses is 17 because I want to work with that that first 17 file. And so then I could just get my program working from there. So the sort of main data structure that you are required to use to hold these network addresses is a two-dimensional array of each containing 4 unsigned chars. So you also learn about those in the lecture 8, but I'll put this as a comment here. Hold network addresses in a two-dimensional array of 4 unsigned chars. So in the end, you're going to want this to be an unsigned char, and you're going to have an array, something like, we might call it addresses, and we know that how many addresses we're going to have. It's going to be num addresses. Now we're just hard coding that in, but eventually you'll read it from the command line. And then we know that we're going to have 4 unsigned chars. And so at this point, you could do that. You could also, if you just if you haven't watched the unsigned char lecture yet, and you just want to get something working, you could just read these as ints. So you could just make an integer array here. So yeah, the size of the first array dimension is our command line argument. So maybe I'm going to need I need to fill, so read file to fill array. And maybe I define a function that does that. And then, so it's important that you then sort the array. So you're going to have to define a function to sort, probably. I mean, I guess it's not required that you put it in a function, but that you definitely should. So in order to compute find which networks, find the number of hosts per network, you're going to need to sort it. Because if you just say you passed over, without sorting, it's going to be way too slow. So you're going to need to sort the array. And so you would do that in place, I guess. You would pass in the reference to the array, and then you just sort it, and then it would be sorted. And then however you do, now you're going to have to print the info about the array. So that's going to be the per class, the number of unique networks, and then the largest network, so the network that has the most hosts. And so that you might need multiple functions for that. Maybe you call a different function for each class, however you want to do it. And then let's just go to the requirements, I guess, here. So do you need to name it program 1, put it in the right directory. You're required to use at least 3 functions in addition to main. And so if you use more than 4 functions, if you use exactly 4 functions, by the time you turn this in, you're going to need to put each in a separate file. If you use more than 4 functions, you could use one file for each function, or you could group them in some logical way, whatever you think is best. Like I said, you need to use unsigned chars. So the idea here is that since you know that your integers are only between 0 and 255, you don't need to allocate a whole int's worth of space. And so we learn about this in the unsigned care lecture, so you can take a look at that. You're also going to need to use a makefile. This is, I think, lecture 7, so take a look at that. Again, use diffchecker to compare your output. So let's look at the grading here. So just like all the previous assignments, you need comments and you need to indent your code, and it needs to compile without warnings. You're going to need to read in and use the command line parameter. Oh, I haven't talked about this yet, but and there's no specification for your error if there's no command line argument, I guess. So you can print whatever you want if there's an error, or if they don't put in a command line argument. And you need to use this two-dimensional array. So if you don't have, so really in your program it's going to be this unsigned care. And so if you don't have something like this in your code, then you would not get these 10 points. And if you don't put all the addresses in. Again, we got to use unsigned cares. So we also need to use our makefile. So right now, I have just, all of mine is in one. So currently all my code for program 1 is in a single file. And so I do have a makefile, but it's really simple because I just have one file. So before I turn this in, I would need to separate out into 4 files and make an appropriate makefile. So if you don't know how to do that, check out the video from lecture 7. And that needs to work. You gotta have 4 different files, and then of course compute the number of networks correctly, identify the largest network correctly, and print out the largest one. You do need to sort the addresses before you count them. And so you're going to have to implement a sorting algorithm. And then there's an additional 5 points that you can get if you use something other than selection sort. But so here, I guess since we're sorting a two-dimensional array, you probably wouldn't just find this code online, but don't just Google C code for merge sort or something like that. If you're going to use a different sorting algorithm, you're going to have to implement it yourself. But if you want to, you're definitely welcome to. So go ahead and do that. But selection sort is also a great choice. So that is program 1. As you can tell, there's a lot going on, so start early.